Hello, my name is Stanley Heller, and this is The Struggle. One of the most important books I've ever read about the Middle East is called The Other Side of Israel by Susan Nathan. Nathan is an Israeli Jew who lives in the Israeli town of Tamra. The town is all Palestinian except for Nathan. And this is extraordinary because Israeli Jews won't live with Israeli Arabs. It may be a simplification, but the 1.2 million Palestinian Arabs are considered the enemy. I had the privilege of meeting Susan Nathan in Israel during a bus tour that I took with a number of students who were coming from the West Bank. Most of today's program will consist of remarks she made in Tamra and answers she gave to questions. It will be an eye-opener to those who think that the problems of Israel and Palestine are only confined to the land that Israel occupied in 1967. Nathan believes there's another occupation inside of Israel, with Palestinian communities shrinking into smaller and smaller areas, facing housing demolition and severe prejudice and discrimination. I'll also, on the program, read to you an op-ed that I sent to Connecticut newspapers in response to the testimony of General Petraeus. Finally, October 27th is coming, and with that, a massive demonstration in Boston against the war. And I'll give you some of the first details. Susan Nathan was raised in South Africa, lived for many years in England, and moved enthusiastically to Israel to become a citizen around the year 2000. But by 2003, her eyes had been opened, and she moved to live in the town of Tamra. Tamra is northeast of the beautiful port city of Haifa. It has the look of West Bank towns, congested.
I live here. Here in Tamra is inside Israel, which before 1948 was Palestine. And we here in Israel are Arab citizens of Israel. I'm a Jewish citizen of Israel. I'm one of only 3 Jews in the whole world who choose to make their life with the Palestinians as a protest against the form of the policy, against the policies of the government. So I make it very clear that the Israeli policies do not represent me as a human being or as a citizen or as a Jew. However, inside Israel, we also have occupation. Where you are now in this town, we have 30,000 people living on 1,000 dunams of land, okay? By 2020, we'll be between 42 and 45,000 people on the same amount of land. And that will bring our living standards here, our living conditions, which you can see it's very, very high density living here, okay? And this has come like this because the land is expropriated for the use of Jews only. So we'll be between 42 and 45,000 people in 2020, which will make our living conditions in a direct parallel with those of Gaza, the most overpopulated piece of land in the world. What I've documented, this is the book that I wrote called The Other Side of Israel. It's translated into something like 15, 20 languages, something like that. It's now compulsory reading in many universities around the world and political science departments, Arab and Islamic and Middle Eastern studies departments. And it marks an important turning point in the way in which Jews outside of Israel have been given a chance to view another type of Israel. That's why it's called the other side of Israel. It's the Israel that the politicians don't tell you about, that is hidden to the majority of tourists. I mean, why would you come here to Tamra if it wasn't the fact that a well-known writer lived here? You wouldn't come here, and it wouldn't be on your tour. And nobody would tell you about the land expropriation and the way in which we live here. And it's perfectly possible to come to Israel and to have a wonderful tour looking at the Christian sites and the Jewish holy sites, and completely forgetting that this was Palestine before 48, and that nearly this area of Tamra that we're in now is actually a refugee camp. It's made up of families from 5 different villages in this area that were destroyed in 48, and they lost everything, and they came here to Tamra. And they had to, this area was covered by International Red Cross tents, and they lived in tents here, and then they went on to build shacks and to buy land from the people of Tamra. And most of the people here work in the construction industry. I describe in my book how the Israeli ethnocratic regime has turned the majority of the Palestinian population inside Israel into a sort of proletariat who go to work from the Arab satellite towns into the Jewish areas. There are no buses or public transport to and from Jewish areas to Arab areas after 5:30 at night. That is along the same lines as the South African regime before the fall of apartheid. I'm also a South African citizen, and I lived in South Africa for a while during the apartheid, and all my family still live there. So I have considerable experience of the apartheid years. And it's a very, very similar situation here.
In 2000, after the collapse of the Oslo peace process and the killing of 7 Palestinians outside of Al-Aqsa Mosque by Israeli soldiers, Palestinians erupted into an uprising called an intifada. It was then that Susan Nathan started questioning her Zionist enthusiasm.
When we had the Intifada here in 2000, I started to ask myself, where am I as a citizen, and not just as a citizen, as a Jew, in this Intifada? What is my role here in this Intifada? Because when we have an Intifada, it's not only a Palestinian thing, it's also a Jewish thing. But Jews tend to point their fingers at Arabs and say, look at the Arabs, they should be grateful. Look what we do for them. They live as equals in our society. And I turned it around in my head and said, what's my role here? How is this fixing together, and what's going on here? And why can't I see it the way that other people around me see it? And this was when I started to look into the living conditions of Arab citizens here. And I started to discover that it was shockingly like apartheid-era South Africa. And once I had realized what was going on, it became impossible for me to go on living an ordinary life in Tel Aviv. And so I was very lucky that at that time a Jewish Palestinian organization of university students asked me to make research for them and to start supervising their students, but only in the Arab areas. And that put me into quite a high position very fast. And I had to learn about the Arab life. And at the same time that I came here to Tamra, which is where some of the work was, That's why I chose Tamra. I met an Arab, a Palestinian academic from Haifa University who offered me a job in his research organization, and we became very good friends. And it was really after reading his works, he confirmed my suspicions, that I decided that I wanted to make it clear that the policies of this country do not represent me. And so I moved my life here.
In her book, Nathan talked about how Palestinian teachers inside of Israel must be approved by security services who make sure that none of them will ever teach Palestinian history and culture. I asked Nathan for details.
But teachers, all Arab teachers in the Arab sector, all Palestinian teachers in the Arab sector in Israel have to be certified by the internal security services before they can get a job. And one of the problems that leads to in schools is that children have no respect for their teachers because they know that they are compliant with the system. And that's one of the major issues that this book raises, is the relationship between the system and the occupied, who are forced to collaborate with the system to be able to have a position.
For decades, it's been forbidden to teach Israeli Palestinians about their history. But just last year, authorities did allow teaching of the Nakba, which means catastrophe, and that's what Palestinians call the events of 1948. This will now be taught in a fashion in Palestinian schools in Israel.
It's only since last year that Palestinians in Israel have been legally able to teach the history of the Nakba. Okay, and even then that has to be within specialist guidelines laid down by the Ministry of Education, all right? And it has to be taught alongside the Holocaust, which I think is crazy, because I think immediately what it does is it puts it forces the children into a situation where they're not free to delve into their own feelings and their own history about their own roots, about their own catastrophe, okay? And then at a later stage to be able to talk about how they feel with Jews who or some Jews here, you know, majority of Jews here have traumatic backgrounds, are from refugee backgrounds. I mean, one of the things that I write about very deeply, an issue that's not discussed here very much, is how Arabs look back on their places of origin with a sense of nostalgia, okay? But Jews, for the most part, do not look back on their places of origin with the same nostalgia. Land is central to Arab culture, whether it be here in Palestine or Saudi Arabia or anywhere else in the Arab world. But land is not central to Jewish culture. And so Jews have tremendous difficulty understanding why Palestinians are insisting on the right of return. But land ownership and coming back to your place of origin, where your family have been for thousands of years, is an essential part of Palestinian culture. It's only been taught for 1 year, according to the Ministry of Education, legally.
Oh, okay.
Okay?
Okay.
But all over the country, there are individual teachers, and I write about that in the book, who have been teaching about the Nakba illegally, as it really was. Okay?
She was asked about ways in which Palestinians were kept separate.
First of all, it's really important to know that the the landscape in Israel has been changed. It's artificial. All of the landscape that you see in Israel is artificial. It has been changed by the Jewish National Fund with money from the United States and Europe, okay, to plant hundreds of thousands of fir trees. All the fir trees that you see growing at Ein Hod, these are all imported. These are not natural trees of the Middle East, okay? The entire landscape of Ein Hod and that whole area is a lie. So the whole of Israel is covered in forests like this, which make it impossible for Palestinians to go back to their land, which cover the destruction of 1948, and by keeping us in our villages like this without enough transport and cut off. I mean, if you were here for longer, we could drive all around here in the hills, and you'll see how we only have one proper road in and out of Tamra, which is the one you arrived on.
She was asked, as a former South African, to describe any similarities between Israel and old apartheid South Africa.
I told you there's no transport after 5:30. This is identical to South Africa. The Jewish National Fund controls most of the land in Israel. They've just passed now a major bill in the Knesset, which means that all the land owned by the Jewish National Fund is by law only for Jews only, okay? And there's a growing population here, as I described before, and sooner or later we're going to have a massive intifada here. A massive, massive intifada. People here can't get jobs because the security services use all sorts of fabricated lies against them, like we checked out your family and you have family in so-and-so and they've been in prison, so we can't give you a job. I mean, if they haven't served in the army, they can't get a job. It's very hard for them to get dorms in the universities, for example, because preference is given to Jewish kids who've served in the army. This is a way of discriminating, and the list is endless. I mean, here I can't say that we have, well, I suppose we do have sometimes. We have shortages of drugs, shortages of water. People here can't afford to pay the basic communal tax, so they cut off all the water supplies from time to time. It's endless. I mean, it's just endless what goes on here.
I asked her if missiles sent by Hezbollah last year during the war had hit anywhere near Tamra.
Very near here, very near here. It was only an act of God that one didn't land in the middle here. But we lived here all through the war because we have nowhere else to go, because there is absolutely no provision for Arabs here in Israel, no way of protecting them from the war. We have no sirens, we have no underground shelters. And it showed something very interesting, that straight away the people, support for Hezbollah here is very strong. Majority of Arabs in Israel here support Hezbollah in the war. That should tell you something about the occupation here, about what's really in the minds of these people.
Nathan was also asked about Jimmy Carter's new book about Palestine. Unfortunately, the mic had drifted away, and so we're not able to use any of that video. However, what she said was very interesting. Carter had been sent a copy of her book, and she says she knows he has read it. Now, Carter is seen as incredibly critical of Israel. He's even slandered routinely as anti-Semitic. But he takes great pains in saying that when he talks about apartheid, he's not talking about Israel itself. Nathan says she was disgusted that he had not made that kind of comparison, and that she had written him a letter saying that she admired him as a man of courage, but his courage did not go far enough. After General Petraeus gave his testimony to Congress, I wrote a piece and sent it to several Connecticut newspapers. It's called Cut and Run. Now that General Petraeus and the administration have given their spin on their Iraq disaster, perhaps the public might be interested in a view from a member of the peace movement. After all, we did get it right about Iraq from the start. The question of whether the surge is working, of course, depends on your definition of working. If one means that the insurgents have pulled back in Baghdad because of the flood of new troops there, then there has been a measure of success. But of course that was predictable. Any guerrilla force does retreat in the face of an offensive. However, if by success, if by working, one means that things are settling down in Iraq and that the Iraqi government is bringing order and progress, then the surge is revealed as a gold-plated scam. The Iraqi government is a collection of collaborators, opportunists, and religious zealots. It is absolutely irrelevant for the country. It does nothing for the country, and the country has no interest in the Iraqi government. Actually, Iraq doesn't exist. The country formerly known as Iraq is a collection of city-states: Basra, Mosul, Kirkuk, Erbil, Baghdad, etc. They're each run by militias. And the U.S. Army is just the most powerful of the militias. Yes, the number of soldiers killed in the last couple months has gone down, but it's comparable to the number killed at this time last year. Has the number of Iraqi killed gone down? Who knows? How can anyone trust statistics given up by the Bush administration? The best estimate of Iraqis killed since the shock and awe invasion comes from the Johns Hopkins group that published its findings about a year ago in a British medical journal, The Lancet. They said, according to their best practices, their study, about 650,000 had died up until that time. Now, Tony Blair's scientific advisors looked at their methodology and found it indeed was best practice. But the Bush administration, when they're asked about this, and when they even mention anything about Iraqi casualties, they say 30,000 dead. So how can you trust anything they say? One thing that is certain is that the flood of refugees has not abated. Nearly 3 million have fled the country, and another 3 million have been ethnically cleansed and forced to move into other areas of Iraq. Then there's that bit of news at the start of August, that there had been no water in Baghdad for 24 hours. No water because the electric grid cannot provide sufficient power to run water purification and pumping stations. No water when the temperature in Baghdad was 117 degrees. 4 years of reconstruction, and the people can't even get a drink of water. The war is lost. Our soldiers and the Iraqis have died in vain. Yet the Republicans and Democratic politicians won't stop the bleeding. They can't admit that they twisted the facts for over a decade and absurdly proclaimed that their one-time ally, Saddam, was now the new Hitler and a threat to the world. So they continue to cover their political behinds by cynically crying, "Support the troops," while they prepare to expand the war exponentially into Iran. On September 2nd, the Times of London said the United States was making plans to, quote, annihilate, unquote, the Iranian military with 1,200 attacks on every sizable Iranian military target in 3 days. This blitzkrieg is supposedly deserved because our generals claim the Iranians are supplying Iraqis with roadside bombs, and because Iraq might have a secret nuclear program that might one day produce nuclear bombs, even though the CIA and the International Atomic Energy Agency, they have no evidence at all of this program. Senator Lieberman dreams up the sense of a Senate resolution accusing Iran of murder, and it passes 97-0. Then he gets $75 million added to the Foreign Operations Act to support gangs of Iranian dissidents, really thugs, in low-intensity warfare against their government. That shock and awe, too, against Iran could lead to a general uprising of Iraqi Shia against our troops in Iraq hasn't occurred to anyone. That an unprovoked attack on Iran would be the supreme war crime of aggression doesn't bother anyone. That the evisceration of another Muslim country would be a spectacular recruiting tool for Al-Qaeda seems to be below everyone's radar. Cut and run. Cut the Iraq-Iran war budget to zero and run the lobby-fattened, war-junkie, chicken-hawk politicians out of town. On October 27th, a new coalition called New England United hopes to bring 20,000 people to Boston, Massachusetts to protest the war. Final details have not been hammered out, but some of the speakers have been confirmed. One is the historian Howard Zinn. Another is Liam Madden from Iraq Veterans Against the War. The third is Rostam Pourzal, an Iranian activist who will talk about the slogan, "No War Against Iran." That's our program for today. See you next week at this time. I'm Stanley Heller, and this is The Struggle.
Building a wall between friends, a wall that justifies any means for their ends, a wall between Semites, rich and poor, brothers and sisters from not so long before, many feet thick and 20 feet high. No one